Hi, I'm Pierce Jentz with Baratza Support. Today I'm going to show you how to take apart and put back together your Forte gearbox. Let's get to it. Unplug your Forte. Remove the hopper. Remove the grounds bin. I'm going to put the hopper lid to the side so I can use it as a tray for small parts. Lay a soft rag on your work surface so we can put the Forte face down without scratching it. Remove the 2mm hex bolt on the rear of the case. Stand the grinder upside down and remove the rear 2 feet. Remove the Phillips screw from underneath each foot. With the 2 screws removed and the rear case screw removed, the case will slide up and off. Next, we need to remove the front display by removing the center Phillips screw. Once the screw is removed, the display will rock forward from the bottom, and you can work it out from the top. If it is being a little bit sticky, we can use a flathead screwdriver to very gently encourage it. There are 2 wires plugged into the back of the display. We need to unplug each of these. Do not pull on the wires to unplug it. Use a small set of pliers to grab the plug directly and unplug it. With the faceplate removed, we can access the knob screws. The knob screws are a gold-colored screw holding the knob to the lever. The best way to remove them is with a 90-degree screwdriver. With the knobs removed, we can now remove the front bracket. We need to remove the front bracket screws, shown in gold. There are two more Phillips screws holding on the front bracket. These two are a little bit harder to get to, and you need a long Phillips screwdriver, preferably one with a little bit of wobble to it. The last two Phillips screws holding on the front bracket are on the inside from the rear near the top. Now that you can see where they are, I'm going to go ahead and lay the grinder face down on my work surface again to best access these two screws. With these two screws and their lock washers removed, the front bracket is now ready to come off. Take care when taking off the front bracket, as there are two spring-loaded detents that provide the clicking noise. The detents ride in the ends of the lever arms. And if you take the front bracket off abruptly, they can come out. Go ahead and remove the detents and put them to the side, and then tilt the grinder over and remove the two springs as well, to ensure they are not lost. We need to remove the motor. The motor is held in by two Phillips screws, and there is a third Phillips screw that rotates the motor for belt tension. We must first loosen the belt tension screw, and we must be careful to tighten it the same amount that we loosen it when putting back together. The best way to do this is remember to turn the screw 720 degrees looser. So watch the top part of the screw, 180 degrees, 360 degrees, 540 degrees, 720 degrees looser. With the tensioning screw loosened, we can now remove the two screws holding the motor into the grinder. The motor will drop down, and we'll position the belt so we can get the motor all the way out. Take note of the wire routing at this point. You can see that one of the wires goes through the back two posts and then down to the scale. We can see another wire going through the back two posts and up to the safety switch. And we can see a third wire coming from the front and between the black motor plate and the chassis down to the circuit board. With the motor out of the grinder, we will now unplug the motor from the circuit board and undo the ground wire to completely free the motor. I'm going to just barely put this screw back in so I remember the ground wire when reassembling. And then go ahead and put the motor to the side. The next step is to split the upper half from the lower half of the grinder. There are 4 screws securing it, 2 of which are these ones. And the other 2 are on the front side. You can see there is 1 green wire still holding the 2 together. We're going to go ahead and remove the screw from the upper casting to allow them to fully separate. I'm going to go ahead and unplug all the wires from the circuit board. And the final wire you are not able to unplug because it is attached to the scale. But we should be able to work it through and free it. Now is another good time to see how the wires are routed. You can see this one, let's see here, going in between the 2 columns and over to the switch. You can see this one going between the post and the housing around to the back side. To remove the grinding chamber from the upper casting, we must remove the 4 outer screws that go through the brass colored grommet. Do not loosen, do not remove the 4 inner screws that do not go through a brass grommet. If you're careful, you can keep the wires in the same position so it's easiest to put back together. Remove the 4 screws we loosened and put them in your parts tray. Next, we need to remove the adjustment arms. There is a 1.5 millimeter hex key set screw holding it in place. So we need to go ahead and loosen it here. To remove the second arm all the way, we need to unscrew the upper burr carrier and remove the lower burr. Get your burr removal tool, unscrew the upper burr, don't forget your gasket, we'll put that back in later. Flip the gearbox upside down, the lower burr will come out. And at this point, the second arm will be ready to come out as well.
Reset.
Now that both the adjustment arms are removed, we need to take out the 2 millimeter calibration screw. With the 2 millimeter calibration screw removed, we can now remove the primary calibration spline assembly. You will likely need to do some prying to get it to come all the way out. After the primary calibration spline is removed, the thrust bearing will come out as well. This is as far as you should ever have to disassemble your Forte gearbox. As you can see, there are only 4 screws left that we have not and will not touch. These 4 screws control the alignment of the bushings of the gearbox. If they are removed, it is impossible to align the gearbox without a special tool. Never remove these 4 screws. Now that our disassembly is complete, it's time to reassemble the grinder. I'm going to reassemble the gearbox. This is an older Forte that I'm demonstrating with, and we have made a small change to the copper colored adjustment spline. The old spline that I am moving is thicker than the spline that we now use, so I'm going to go ahead and install the thinner of the 2 splines. We also made a slight change to the silver bracket. There's an additional hole in the new silver bracket that is lacking in the old one. So I'm going to go ahead and discard the thicker copper colored spline and the bracket that doesn't have the additional hole. The reason for the additional hole is because we changed the 2 millimeter calibration screw as well. You can see the new calibration screw has a spear on the end of it, whereas the old one does not. The old part we will discard. The reason for the spear on the new part is to help keep the spline in position. It goes through the new hole in the silver metal. Chances are the Forte you're taking apart already has all of these parts in it. To reassemble, we must first put the lower burr back into the unit. You can see the tip of the lower burr shaft emerging from the bushing. We're going to put the thrust bearing on next. The thrust bearing has two sides. One side that has a lip on it, and a second side that does not have a lip on it. We're going to install it into the gearbox with the lip against the black plastic. While we are reassembling the gearbox, we need to hold the lower burr in with our fingers until we get to the point where we screw in the upper burr carrier. We have to hold it in to make sure that the thrust bearing stays in position on the tip of the drive shaft. If we don't hold it in, the thrust bearing can get out of position, and then we have to take it apart to resolve. Install the thrust bearing into the grinder with the lip against the black plastic. Install the adjustment rocker next. Next, we're going to install the macro adjustment arm. The macro adjustment arm is keyed and only goes in one way. Getting the macro adjustment arm in is difficult and will take you longer than it is shown in this video. To get it in easiest, let the lower burr fall down a little bit in your hand, and then play with the position of the bracket until you are able to get the arm to slide in. Once we have the arm in place, go ahead and tilt the gearbox up and down. If the bearing got out of position, you will hear it sliding around when you do this. It should be quiet, as mine is now. This can move, that is okay. No bearing noise. Next, we're going to install the micro adjustment cam. You will have to find the right position of the macro arm to allow the micro adjustment cam to go into place. Actually, I'll show you real quick. The micro cam has a groove machined into the tip of it. This groove is what the set screw that we loosened locks into. So we need to slide the cam in enough to get the set screw back into that groove. And there is a drilled and tapped hole where you can see the position of the cam, so you can move it to the right area where you can see the groove through this tiny hole. Once you're over the groove with the micro cam in place, go ahead and tighten the set screw up. Tighten the set screw until it is snug, and the arms will no longer be able to pull apart from each other. We're ready to flip the gearbox back upright and install the upper burr. This is nice because we won't have to hold the lower burr with our hands anymore. With the upper burr in place, the lower burr can't fall out far enough to let the thrust bearing get out of position. We're going to go ahead and install the 2mm set screw. Tighten the screw until it is near flush, maybe 1mm above flush. Install your rubber gasket around the grind chamber. At this point, we have the gearbox put back together and we're ready to put it onto the upper casting. With the gearbox assembled, we're ready to install it back onto the top casting. Look at the wire routing of the top casting. There's a 2-prong wire that plugs into the main circuit board on the chassis. It curls around the column and then goes to the circuit board. There are 2 4-prong wires that plug into the back of the display. One wire is routed properly right where we left it during disassembly. The other wire is attached to the load cell on the bottom half of the unit, and we need to go ahead and route that wire now before installing the gearbox assembly. Slide your chute off of your gearbox assembly. Make sure your gasket is in position, and then go ahead and slide your gearbox assembly into the grinder casting. Both of my 4-prong wires will make it to the display, and they're routed between the gearbox housing and the column, which is good. Get your 4 screws and screw down the gearbox assembly. Remember, there's a ground wire going to one of these 4 screws. So we need to make sure to put the ground wire back in. It is the smaller of the 2 green ground wires. I'm tightening the screws in an X pattern to make sure everything seats correctly. Once all the screws are reasonably tight, I'm going to go back over them for a final torque pass. Go ahead and slide your chute back into place. At this point, we're ready to put the upper casting back onto the lower half of the grinder. Run your scale wire and your ground wire outside away from the belt. There are 2 longer silver screws for the back holes and 2 short brass screws for the front holes. Just as before, I recommend getting each screw started and tightened down a little bit, and then going back and torquing all 4 of them. It's nice to have a clean workspace so any runaway washers are easy to locate. Because these little washers will fall multiple times. With all 4 screws started, I can go back and tighten each one down. Next, I need to slightly reposition the micro switch wire. It needs to get down to the main circuit board. We'll go ahead and plug it in. We also need to finish feeding the display wire down to the circuit board and plug it in as well. Alright, we're ready to put back on the front casting. Next we're going to install the front panel. Get your 2 D10 springs and slide them back into the lever arm. Slide your D10s into position. Go ahead and fit your front disc bracket on. We're going to grab our soft cloth because we're going to lay the grinder down on its face. I'm doing this so that gravity holds the springs and the detents in against the display bracket. So I can put in the 2 screws that hold it in on the top. It's really handy to have a magnetic screwdriver for this, or just take your screwdriver and wipe it across a magnet so that it will hold on to the screw and the washer. I have the washer in place but my screw fell through, so I'm going to use my other screw and see if I can get it started here. Now that I have one screw holding on the bracket, I can lift the grinder up and get my other screw out. Slide the washer onto it. It is a rather big washer for the screw. We'll go ahead and get the other side in using the same technique. It's going to take you a couple tries to get both these screws in. Once the 2 back screws are tightened, we're going to go ahead and stand the grinder back up and put in the two small brass colored screws that hold the bracket on the front. With the front bracket fully installed, we can now put back on our lever knobs. Alright. We're ready to install the front display. There are two wires that plug into the back of the display. One of the bundles has a green wire in it. The one with the green wire plugs into the bottom receptor on the display. The one with the blue wire plugs in on the top. And we'll go ahead and rock the display back into position and put the one Phillips screw in the center at the bottom to hold it in. We need to reinstall the motor. Before reinstalling the motor, we need to put the ground wire back on. So go ahead and take that bolt the rest of the way out that we left loose, so we can reattach the ground wire. Let's plug in the motor while it's easy. Pull the belt over the pulley. Go ahead and get your motor mount screw in position. And we need to find the hole so we can get it started. Once you have one screw started, go ahead and get the other screw started as well. Once both screws are started, use your 90-degree Phillips to get them a little bit more snug. Once both the screws are snug but not too tight, we can go ahead and turn the belt tensioning screw 720 degrees back in. We've got 180, 360, 540, 720. We're ready to tighten up the two motor screws until they are very tight. Next, we're going to reinstall the rear case. Lie the grinder back down on your work surface. Slide the rear case into position. Should slide smoothly into position. If it's not, figure it out. There we go. Alright, quick, start the camera. Insert the machine screw into the top back of the cover. Go ahead and stand the grinder upside down so we can put back in the two screws for the rear cover. Press the feet back into position. Go ahead and slide your grounds bin and reinstall your hopper. Wipe out the lid that we were using as a parts tray. And your Forte is back to being put together.